Hi, welcome to Phil's Virtual Sewing Club. My name's Cindy, and today we're going to show you how I use the Baby Lock Chenille Foot. This is the foot, and we're going to talk about how we created several different projects using chenille. I use the Chenille. It's a product. It is bias already cut on the roll. And this is available in 3/8 and 5/8, and that makes it a lot easier. You can also create your own bias strips. I used a homespun here, and you can connect your bias strips just like you would connect your quilt binding, and then you press your seams open, and you're not going to be able to tell where that intersection is, that seam is, when you bloom your bias. You can also layer. I've got a 3/8 and a 5/8, and I use these together to create a double border for this quilt. Another thing I did here is I cut 4.5-inch wide strip on some Christmas fabric, and that was before I cut. And then you cut it into 4.5-inch squares. This is what the chenille it looks like sewed down before you brush it. When you brush it or launder it, it's gonna fuzz up and bloom. And then I placed one vertically and then one horizontally, and so on, and that created, and you can continue going. This is just a sample quilt. Another way you can use the chenille is I cut my bias binding 2.5, and then when I folded it in half, I made a line and stitched the chenille down the center. And then when I fold it in half, what you're going to do is you're going to fold both those pieces. They're going to end up on the end. You stitch your binding to the back. You fold it to the front. You've got a nice embellishment for your quilt binding. You stitch in the ditch. And you can also create freehand with your friction marker, and then just stitch over that. You can do an initial, you can do floral, you can do anything you want and create your own design using the chenille. Another thing, I used applique on this one, and on the turkey feathers, I stitched down 5/8 of the bias strips. I used 3 layers of this. You can use 1, 2, or 3 layers with these. I used 3 layers for this. And you just stitch and then cut, stitch and cut. It's very easy. And then you do your applique, and then you will fluff up your chenille pieces, your bias strips, and it's going to bloom. I also did the edge of the towel. You sew it on the back, leaving about 1/8 of an inch off the edge, and then you turn it and you do the same on the front. And then when it's washed or brushed, it's going to fuzz up, and it's going to create this effect. You can also use it for home dec projects. Just simply mark lines on your fabric. And I also did a little pumpkin here, put a little applique piece, and then you basically take your brush. I've got one open here, and you're going to brush this to fluff it and make it bloom, and then you've got your project done. So you don't even have to wash everything. On the things that you can't wash, you can also use the brush to make it bloom, or you can throw it in the wash with some towels if you don't have an agitator, and then throw it in the dryer and it'll fluff. Another thing is, I was going to show you really quick, when you're creating, you can create your own bias strips, and you can you don't use a lot of it, so you can use just a fat quarter, and you basically fold one edge to the other, and then you're gonna straighten out your edge here, and then you're going to cut 5/8 or 3/8. You can even do a 1/2 inch if you choose. And you can, like I said, you can use 1, 2, or 3 layers. You can even do 4 layers if you choose to. You can combine colors. It's just a fun way to embellish any project that you have in mind to use that chenille on. So we're going to go to the machine, and I'm going to show you how I stitched this chenille strips down with the chenille foot on a small project, and we'll be right back. Okay, now we're at the machine, and what we're going to set up our machine for is a center needle position straight stitch, and we're going to lower the stitch length to 2.0. Now, I've got 2 pieces of the chenille cut, and I'm going to show you here how this seam is. This is cut off of the roll of the chenille. Now this is bias strips already cut, and they're ready to be sewn on. With the chenille foot, you've got an opening at the toe of the foot, and you're going to insert that and then come under the foot. And now we're going to insert the foot, and we'll snap that on. Okay, and I'm using black thread right now. Typically you would use the matching color to the strip, but I'm going to use black this time just for the tutorial so you'll be able to see it. We want to make sure we're in the center of this bias strip so that when you use the brush to brush it, it's kind of a balanced fluff on that. So I'm going to take a couple stitches. I'm going to lower my foot before I introduce my fabric. That's just to secure it. And now I've taken my fabric, and this could be any project, and I used chalk and made a line, and I'm basically going to put that in the center and just basically stitch, laying that chenille, and it will automatically feed itself. And when you get to the end, merely cut it, pull your strip out, and then you just trim the chenille. There we've got 2 rows of the chenille, and that's going to, once we brush that or launder that, that's going to make a great little fluff on this. It's going to make it bloom. Blooming is fluffing. So it's going to bloom this chenille so that it's a nice thick embellishment. I wanted to show this little quilt sample and how I accomplished this with the bias strips. I stitched together, you know, this 9 patch, and then I layered my batting and my backing, and then you can actually quilt this while you're adding the chenille. So if you look at the back, I quilted in the ditch with my chenille, and then I used my serger around the edge to clean up all the edges. Now the next step to this is I'm going to sew my chenille binding on. It's going to create its own binding, and we start on the back. We're going to add our chenille, leaving the strip about 1/8 of an inch off the edge so that it'll have a nice coverage for that edge. So I've got my chenille strip. I'm going to only use 1 strip right now, and I'm going to insert the chenille through the foot and snap on my foot. And then I'm going to take a stitch or two. Okay, I'm going to raise my foot, introduce my fabric, and I'm going to set my chenille so that's about an 1/8 of an inch off the edge. I catch fabric here. If you need to, you can kind of pull from the back side, but that chenille will stitch right along that edge, creating our own little binding. You can almost see through the little chenille strip here. You may not be able to see that on the camera, but and when you get to the end, you'll basically just cut your chenille and stitch off the edge. And see, you've got your chenille sticking out of the end. So that's going to bloom. We're going to go ahead and stitch all the way around that, and then we're going to come to the front. Okay, now I've finished the bias all along the back side, the chenille. I've done 3 sides around the front. And you want to make sure that you're not pulling on this chenille strip because it is biased and it will stretch. For the maximum fluff, you want to make sure that you're just letting it feed on its own. I'm on my last pass here, and put it under my foot. You just want to let it feed. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just trim these. And you can see here that this got bent over just a little bit. None of this is going to matter because once it fluffs up, you'll never be able to tell. So now I'm going to take my brush, and you could use a little elbow grease here and just brush the edges of this bias. I'll do this side on the front and back. Here's the back. And you just rub it as much as you want to fluff it. Do like a little circular motion sometimes to really get into those fibers. Little elbow grease. And just and look at that. You've got a nice covering for your edge with the chenille, without having to do by it. Created its own little binding, and you can't even see anything on the edges here since you stitched that up. And if you did 2 or 3 layers, you're going to have, like I did on that towel, you're going to have a little bit more coverage. It just depends on your desire and what the outcome you want. So this is a fun way to embellish any project. I hope you enjoyed that. Using the Chenille Foot, that's item BLSA-CHF, the chenille brush, and the Chenille It fabric. This is fabric on a roll. It's already in on on the bias, or you can create your own if you choose to do so. I hope you've enjoyed this. All of these products are available at Phil's in Washington, Missouri. Until next time.